Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I'm your host, Christian Harris, and welcome to 2022. This is our first episode of the new year, and we've got a great one in store for you, where I'm joined by Ian Collins. Ian is a safety coach. In fact, that's the name of his business, Safety Coach International. But like many of us, he pivoted at the start of the pandemic. And since then, he's, as well as been doing his safety coaching, he's also started doing some relationship coaching. And I thought this sounded fascinating because I was really interested to draw the parallels between what makes someone good and perform well in a relationship versus what makes somebody perform well at work when it comes to safety. So we have a really interesting discussion about that. And the key thing that comes out for me, hence the title of the episode, is this profound feeling that in order to be safe, feel safe in a relationship, in order to feel safe at work, it's exactly that. It's feeling safer. And that's something that I talk about a lot. That's kind of the essence, I suppose, of what I try to do in my day-to-day job when I'm not presenting podcast episodes, is leave people feeling safer. And that comes through really, really strongly in this conversation with Ian. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's dig into it now. Cheers. Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Christian, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
That's okay. I'm in a freezing cold London, and I'm very jealous. Tell us where you are.
Oh, this time last year I was in a freezing cold London, but right now I'm in Bali in Indonesia, and quite happy to be here. It is currently rainy season, but it is a beautiful, balmy sort of temperature. So happy to be here.
What is the temperature right now, or during the day?
It hovers between 26 and 30 degrees.
Oh, that's perfect. It's not too hot.
Not too hot. Every single day. Same.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I got married in Italy, and we often go. We haven't been for the last couple of years because of the pandemic, but we tend to go back in the summer. And if it's kind of mid-20s to 30, then that's perfect. But as soon as it starts to hit sort of 32, 33, it starts getting a bit hot for me.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Perth, where summers can get 40 degrees. So I quite like the tropics here. It's consistent. It's beautiful, tropical, jungly vibes.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. My brother did a year in Perth, actually, a few years ago. I didn't make it out because it was kind of just when I was having my first son and buying a house, and so just the timing was not good. But so I missed him over there, unfortunately. But he's now back over here, so I get to see his ugly mug in case he's listening a bit more frequently. But he enjoyed it. And we did a best part of a month in Australia, actually, when my oldest son was about 9 months old. So we did Sydney, Melbourne, Blue Mountains, Great Ocean Road, all the sort of Uluru, all the highlights.
Nice. Yeah, it's a good place.
Yeah, no, it's a good place. Yeah. So looking forward to getting you on, Ian. And I thought I'd start by quoting a very venerable health and safety leader that I've met, and he said, "For most of my life, I've been keeping other people safe whilst dancing on the edge of risk myself." So tell us about that. That was you, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been described as a risk consultant that definitely likes to live on the edge of risk himself. And I like riding motorbikes. I like snowboarding fast and jumping out of planes and diving with sharks and anything where I can sort of push my own boundaries. And at the same time, I love to keep people safe and to help in whatever capacity I can to get people home safely to their families. So I've been a safety consultant, safety coach for over 10 years now, and started a company called Safety Coach International with that purpose to make the world a safer place by really empowering people to have conversations that matter. And that's the real core mission of our business. And we offer some very boutique sort of services in that regard, and looking at both creating physically safe work environments, but also psychologically safe work environments where people feel safe to speak up and they feel safe to raise issues and concerns and challenges, and when they feel safe in that regard, they also feel safe offering new solutions and ideas for improvement. So that's a big focus of our work. Both physically and psychologically safe work environments.
Yeah, and it's a conversation I love to have around risk as well, because I think that, you know, you have to be willing and able and actually desiring to take risks. Otherwise, you can't grow. You know, you can't start a business without taking risks. You can't start a new product without taking risks. And so I think people sometimes look at safety and risk together and think that it's all about the kind of negative side of risk, but actually it's about empowering people to make the positive choices around risk and stretch themselves and as you say, have those conversations to open up the opportunities to do more.
Yeah, and even going back to, let's say, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, once we've got our security, our physical survival sort of met, you know, then it's about safety, and we can't achieve those high levels of, you know, right up until actualization and almost enlightenment if we don't have that foundation of safety. And I think it's the same in work environments, it's the same in relationships. We need that solid foundation of safety on which to build. People, if they come into work and they don't feel safe, then they're not going to perform at their peak possibility. So if we don't feel safe inside a relationship, it's not going to be a healthy relationship. So for me, safety is such a driver of performance, whatever the context might be.
Yeah, fully agree with you there, and it's something that I love to talk about, and it's kind of trying to elevate the conversation away from, you know, safety being about sort of high-vis jackets and clipboards and ticking boxes, into actually safety being a driver for performance personally and predominantly in my case in businesses, you know, because I'm talking to businesses really with what I do. But it's I mean, how do you find people's reaction to that? If you know, talking about that kind of that ideology, that premise of, you know, the theoretical of, you know, safe, not theoretical, but, you know, the premise of safety drives performance, drives profits, drives out positive outcomes. Do people resonate with that?
People that get it do, and sometimes it takes shifting paradigms for people, where you're exactly right, where there's a narrative around safety is checklists and people telling me what to do, have never done my job, and high-vis jackets and PPE, and those are just, you know, there's some of the elements, but they're all designed to, at the end of the day, you know, have people go home safe, or at least increase the likelihood that people are going to go home safely. So in order to help shift the paradigm, you've got to give people a stronger paradigm in which to view things. And if let's take your business, for example, someone has a slip, they're now liable, and it's going to impact profits, it's going to impact performance. There's there might be new regulations that need to come into play, and that's all impacting the overall performance of the organization. And so if we can get that right and people feel safe, you know, we've designed the environment in which they're at least less likely to have a slip that's going to lead to some, you know, court case, then they're going to perform better. And once people start to see it that way, yeah, let's invest in safety, because it's ultimately going to drive much better, more efficient operations out there in industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons of the naming of this podcast is safety and risk success, because it's all driving towards those positive outcomes. I mean, I talk about what I call the 4 Ps. So I talk about if you can ensure that your staff feel protected, so in other words, they're safe and feel looked after, that drives performance. And there's a lot of evidence to show that feeling safe and protected and secure at work drives higher performance. Higher performance drives profits, and then profit gives you the 4th P, which is power, and that's the power to sort of, you know, grow or hire staff or expand or do sort of meaningful things from a social or charitable perspective. So that's kind of how I try to put that across.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely spot on there, and you know, they're correctly ordered too. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not just a pretty face. Some might say not even a pretty face. Now, and that is a great segue into what I was keen to talk about. It's almost like I just fell into that, but actually it worked quite well, which is that you've been doing some fascinating work trying to draw analogies between kind of safety at work and safety in relationships. Do you want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, and maybe just give some context to that as well. And
yeah,
our business for pre-COVID was primarily flying around the world, meeting with organizations and really coaching leaders, coaching workers and educating workers in a lot of safety concepts, principles, specifically around human and organizational performance. That's sort of our bread and butter with Safety Coach. And when the pandemic hit and we could no longer travel, we really had to pivot and adjust our business, and it became a lot more remote work. And for me personally, all of a sudden I was in one place for a consistent amount of time. I wasn't flying all over the world. And flying all over the world is really hard when it comes to relationships. As much fun as flying all over the world can be, it just adds some complexity to relationships. And so I met someone incredible, and she actually teaches. She created this, what she calls the School of Feminine Magnetism, and she teaches and coaches primarily women to be more sexy, more confident, more wildly free, and just really own who they are as women and attract the sort of man that they really desire. In fact, she wrote a Amazon #1 bestseller about that. And so when we got together, we will go places where we live and guys will literally turn their heads. And so I eventually asked her the question. I said, okay, well, all right, I'm not too bad on the eye, but what is it about me that you found most attractive? Why are you in relationship with me? And she said, it's safety. You create this foundation of safety in which I can just be myself. And that's when it sort of dawned on me. For so long, I've been creating safety out there in the workplace. And a lot of those concepts, like as a man, one of our primary roles inside of relationships, in a heterosexual relationship, is to provide that safety, that security, to allow our partners just to be their fullest self-expression. So it really dawned on me that all of these things I've been teaching and coaching, so much of it is relevant inside of a relationship as well. And, whether it's how we communicate or, looking at creating the environment that safety can occur and people feel safe, so much of that onus is on the masculine sort of partner inside of a relationship. And I just started to see more and more parallels and started to coach men specifically on how do you create and cultivate and really nurture that safety inside of relationships. And we actually started doing a lot of work together, my partner Nora and I, in coaching couples on how to really build that safe, healthy, and secure relationship that so many people desire.
Fascinating stuff. And what's really interesting is just thinking about, well, had the pandemic not happened, would this have happened in your life? And I guess probably not.
Exactly. And it's one of those things that I'm grateful for. Again, as much as I miss traveling, I miss seeing family. There's certain things that happen in life that they seem to be divinely blessed. And I certainly see one of, what's played out as part of that.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, one of the things I talk quite a lot about is kind of the essence of what I try to do, and that is the word I use is making people feel safer. So it's interesting that you've kind of picked up on that and are running with that, and that's kind of when I try to put across some of these persuasive arguments and influence people to take certain actions within the context of my business. That's kind of the essence of why. The essence of why it's important, because it's just about trying to make people feel safer, and then they'll do all those things that we talked about. So yeah, it's really interesting that you've picked up on that as well. And I think you're right that that context of we're talking to people at the end of the day, right? We're not talking about a company spending money or a company having a fine. We're actually talking to the person who's the decision maker and trying to get inside their head and empathize with them and see their worldview and stuff. So actually these feelings, that's where it really is important to get into people's minds in that way, I would say.
Absolutely. And I like what you said there in terms of your essence. I love what Maya Angelou said. She said, at the end of the day, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And particularly as leaders out there, if you can help your people feel safer, then they're going to come to work, with their fuller self, with their more authentic self. And so I do a lot of work with leaders and a lot of executive coaching with leaders around how do you help people feel safer at work? And again, we can do a lot of stuff around creating physically safe work environments, and we obviously want to continue with that. From that leadership perspective, again, it's about relationships, and whether it's an intimate relationship, a committed relationship, or a relationship between a supervisor and their people, what can you be doing? How can you help them feel safer? And how can you create those conditions in which people feel included, they feel safe to learn and grow, they feel safe to contribute, and they also feel safe to really challenge the status quo and raise concerns, raise issues, because we know everything has to occur in balance. And if people don't feel safe raising concerns and issues, then guess what? They're not going to feel safe raising ideas for innovation or ingenuity and offering new solutions to ideas. So as leaders, if we can really have that attention on what can we be doing right now, who do we need to be in order for our people to feel safer, that we're going to go a long way to driving better performance in the organization.
Yeah, fully on board with you there. You shared with me a PDF which was talking more about the personal relationship side of things, and there are a few kind of key points in there. I wondered if we might just run through those kind of headlines and talk about that a bit, and then we can go back to sort of how do we take that learning and cross that over into a business setting. Do you want to just talk us through the kind of steps that you set out in the PDF? Perhaps we'll include a link to that in the podcast show notes.
Yeah, and this was I wrote a document primarily for men, again, inside of heterosexual relationships, about 5 ways to cultivate more safety and trust inside the relationship. And the health of a relationship is you can tell a lot about the health of a relationship, about how safe people feel inside of it. And again, as the masculine partner, one of our primary roles is to create safety and to nurture that feeling of safety. So, how we show up, and in terms of being consistent. And just to give you an example of that, if one day our partner comes to us and we respond in a particular way, and then the next day they come to us and we respond completely differently, that's not going to create the feeling of safety for them. Because they're then sort of walking around on eggshells. They don't know how we're going to either respond or react to that. Yeah. So, our response matters, and we need to be consistent in that response. One of the human and organizational principles is response matters, and response to good outcomes and bad outcomes matters just as equally important. So when it comes to relationships, when our partner shares with us news or information or their feelings, we need to be consistent in how we then respond to that, so that will then have them feel safe, that they can share whatever they need to share without fear of recrimination or reaction or anything like that.
And you can see exactly how that same principle applies in a business setting as well, because if someone comes to you, as you said, with a problem or an idea or a concern or whatever, you can't be sort of all over the place and one day saying that's good and another day saying that's bad, and because they'll lose that trust and that feeling of safety.
And that then wears away the integrity, that foundation, and we lose performance. And let's say we have a bad outcome, someone's involved in an incident, and they come to us as the supervisor, as the leader, and if our first question is, well, who did it and what have you done to them? Guess what? We're not going to get very good information, and we're not going to create the feeling of trust and safety that we want in the workplace. And so, how we respond to that bad outcome is so important. And we want to know, are the people safe? Is the plant or whatever the work environment, is that safe? How can we support them? And then, all right, well, tell me what happened. And that response is very different from who did it, what have you done to them? The other thing, when good things happen, and most of the time in businesses, good things are happening, at least things that, they're not bad things.
Yeah.
And how we respond to that is equally as important. And so often, and we see it all the time, that we miss opportunities to recognize people for the thought or the planning or the strategy that's gone into, good execution. So how we respond to good outcomes is equally as important to how we respond to bad outcomes.
Yeah. And I think consistency as well. I mean, we were having a chat offline before the interview about social media and marketing and positioning and things like that. And I think, it's actually just showing up in the world consistently is a good thing to do for all sorts of reasons, as well as all the benefits we've talked about here.
Exactly. It's not do it once and, think great things are going to come. It's the same as going to the gym. You can't expect massive gains by going once. It's consistency, showing up again and again and again. Yeah. And exactly the same inside of relationships. That's how we create safety. Yeah. And so a big part of that is then developing our emotional intelligence and really developing those skills to be able to respond rather than sort of instinctive reactive tendencies, which can often lead to some bad outcomes. So a lot of what I'm coaching specifically men on in the individual work I do with them is developing that emotional intelligence. And part of that is sometimes going way back into childhood and where it formed and where it developed from. And we see it play out all the time, not just in relationships, but in relationships at work as well. And a lot of times someone will say something and we get triggered. And if we don't learn how to manage that and really develop that EQ, then it just, again, wears away at the safety that people feel. And guess what? They stop coming to us. They stop coming to us with information because they don't know how we're going to react.
Yeah. It's interesting thinking about this and reflecting on it from my perspective. So I'm pretty laid back, and I've got a very long fuse, but there's a couple of things that just trigger me much more than anything else. One of them is like when I'm driving, and I don't know why that is, but like I have a really short fuse when I'm driving. If someone cuts me up or something, I'm like, so I can't think of why that would be. I don't think there's any particular. Well, it could be because I got run over, I suppose, 10 years ago. That might have something to do with it, but I have a feeling I was a little bit that way inclined in driving beforehand. But yeah, it's certainly important to understand and recognise where you've got these challenges and then try to work on them, I guess.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned driving, because it's actually an example we'll use in a lot of the education and the coaching and the training that we do, is looking at those, someone cuts us off and what's our typical reaction to that. And for a lot of people, it's jump on the horn or, the 2-finger salute or even go and cut them off or whatever that reaction may be. And who really wins in that? There's an impact on us, there's an impact on let's say we got other people in the car, and then there's an impact on the situation. And this really hit home for me when I used to live in South Africa, and there they have what they call taxis. And these are these sort of minivans that they pile people into, and they just sort of rule the road. They don't abide by much laws or anything. And this one time, one of them just did a U-turn in front of me. I almost, got cleaned up, and I reacted, and then things escalated. And before you know it, he had a gun hanging out the side of his car. And I thought, you know what? Who actually wins in this whole road rage situation? for whatever reason, that tends to really drive reactions in people. But is that person going to learn a lesson from me then reacting to them, and they're going to be a better driver because of it? Probably not, right?
No, they'll probably put their defense walls up and kind of, it's going to produce a worse outcome than a better outcome, maybe.
Exactly. And so what we coach people on is, it's that moment when we feel ourselves about to react, whether that's it's something external and we might say something or we might do something and then, we might regret it later. That's when we just want to take a breath, take a pause, step back. But for some of us, we tend to react more internally. And in that moment, we might not do or we might not say what we really want to. And for those people that way inclined, it's all about actually pressing play and speaking up and engaging. And when we do that, when we can bring awareness to that moment and then manage it, that's ultimately what emotional intelligence is all about. And that's what typically gets us the better outcomes, through that intentionality about it.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah. What else is there, Ian?
Well, in terms of that relationship, those that role as the masculine partner, as much as we're living in a world of much greater feminine empowerment and equal salaries and all sorts, the feminine by nature still loves to be led. And so in relationships, in those intimate relationships, as the masculine partner, we need to take the lead. For our partner to really feel safe, we need to take the lead. And so again, a coach man around what might that look like. It's things like, take her out for date night and organize, whatever you need to organize, and just really, sometimes we really need to step up to the plate so that she can sort of surrender into that more feminine role. That's just, one of the other sort of things I coach men around in terms of cultivating that feeling of safety in relationships.
Yeah. And another key point was about being present, wasn't it? Being grounded and present, I think you call it.
Yeah. And probably the strongest characteristic that the feminine looks for is presence in a man, and being that sort of grounded, centered, almost rock mountain figure that she can rely on. And it's interesting, there's over the years, there's been a lot of studies into, let's say, codependence and people falling into these sort of codependent patterns where they almost can't exist without each other. But it's a very fine line where, in order for us to really experience independence inside of relationships, we need someone to be able to depend on. And so having that as that masculine partner, being that really present, grounded, center that she can rely on, just helps create that feeling of safety that our partners really crave. And again, the same, there's so many correlations inside of organizational relationships, and the ability to be present, to give people the experience of being listened to or being heard, goes such a long way to people feeling included and committed inside of their organizations.
Yeah, that's something, again, from a personal perspective, I recognize as something I'm working on improving, mostly from the perspective of, I see all the benefits of it, but I sometimes find I'm kind of slightly overwhelmed with so much going on in my head, and I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that, and it's kind of, how do you sort of draw a line under that in a certain situation, and actually kind of forget about it, to enable you to be present in that conversation, in that interaction. When you do that, it's massive,
And you've actually hit the nail on the head there, and particularly as men, we're not particularly good, nor had we really been taught how to really get into our body. We're sort of so caught up in our mind, and women by nature are much better at listening and attuned to their body And the fact that they go through the cycles every month, they're so much more attuned to it. Where we tend to grow up, I mean, you grew up in the UK, I grew up in Australia, and I remember being told, like, real men don't cry. And we almost suppress these emotions, yet our emotions can be our greatest navigational guidance system that we've got, yet we're just not taught how to listen to it. And so when we get stuck in our head, whether that's at home, at work, at play, we struggle to be really present and grounded. And so I was fortunate in the sense that I moved to Bali, where there's a lot of practices that really help people, particularly men, get into their body and really start to listen to that, whether it's through breath work or qigong or all sorts of different cacao ceremonies and meditation and these sort of things really help me develop presence. And that's what our partners want, and that's what people want in the workplace. They want a leader who's present, that they can count on, that they can go to, and they're going to come from a place, not a reactive place, but a thoughtful, considered, responsive place. That's what helps them make, that's what helps make them feel safe.
And I mean, what's interesting is, as I've said already, it's kind of all these things are, it's not just about relationships, it's not just about work, it's actually life in general, isn't it? A lot of this stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
How to be a better person.
And it doesn't matter where you are. Again, whether you're in work, you're in families, you're with friends, it's that feeling of safety. That's ultimately what's going to drive our level of engagement, our level of commitment, our level of performance. If we don't feel safe, then our brain is constantly scanning for threats, and we're reactive. And sometimes we even go into that fight, flight, or freeze sort of response. But when we feel safe, we're there, we're present, we're engaged, we're with people, and so much of work is relationships with people and how we get along and how we perform with one another and give each other the support we need to get what we need to get done.
So we're moving more into a sort of work setting then. I mean, where do you see that on average, typically people sort of get this wrong? Where are the sort of weakest areas and that you find need the most work normally?
There's a great Dutch proverb that says, "Trust arrives on foot but leaves on horseback." And building trust and cultivating trust in the workplace takes time, and it takes consistency, and it takes people having that experience of feeling safe. Yet it can be destroyed in an instant. And particularly how an organization responds to failure will tell you everything you need to know about the level of trust in that organization. And so a big opportunity for many organizations is to really look at the way they're responding to failure. And this is why I love human and organizational performance, because the principles help us understand that one, error is normal. People are going to make mistakes. And if we can't accept that, then we're not going to get very far. And that blame really fixes nothing. By blaming someone, we can either learn and improve, or we can blame, but we can never do both.
Yeah.
People are, we're all impacted by systems. And if an organization, if their first sort of corrective action is addressed at the individual, like we need to coach them or train them, or if it's all directed there, guess what? They might put a new person in place, but they haven't changed the system, and eventually that's going to fail again. And so, for an organization to really look at what in our system is driving this event, that makes a big difference. So, really looking at how the organization responds to failure is that tells you, one, the health of the organization and the culture, and secondly, where the opportunities really are. Because again, trust takes a long time to build, but it can go very quickly.
Yeah, I love that proverb. I haven't heard that before, but I've written it down. I've heard something similar, because I think Warren Buffett talks about something like that as well. Lots of people make that point, but it's very, very that's a good proverb. I might have to steal that for a LinkedIn post or something and get some conversation going.
I can tell you where I stole it from too. I stole it from, and if you haven't read this one, I highly recommend it, The Next Generation Safety Leadership by Clive Lloyd. And he speaks a lot about building and some of the ways that we use language to cultivate more trust and psychological safety in the workplace. Highly recommended reading.
I haven't read that, so but I've heard of Clive, obviously, but I haven't read that. So yeah, I might have to pop that into my birthday wish list or something. I mean, we're recording this before Christmas, but I don't know when it'll get out, so I wouldn't say my Christmas wish list, because otherwise, if somebody wants to buy it for me, if one of my lovely listeners wants to buy it for me, I'll have to wait a year. I'm not expecting that. Don't worry. I can pay for a book myself. So learning from failures is a really big thing. What about, where, on the flip side, where would you say people, in these principles are doing better? Where do you find that on average people are sort of doing quite well?
There's definitely been a shift that I've seen and felt and sort of observe as more and more organizations are really applying human and organizational performance principles. So, for example, the whole concepts and science was really developed through the nuclear, and then aviation adopted it. Rail's been very good with it, oil and gas, and now the shipping industry is really adopted the concepts, and new regulations are coming in to address what they call the human element. So there's definitely a shift occurring. It's how do you integrate these concepts into the day-to-day, which is where I find most organizations sort of fall down. And so they can get it at a conceptual level, but then how do you one, integrate this with already existing systems and really make them better? That typically is where the biggest gap is right now. But in terms of what they're doing well, is at least starting to really understand these concepts and understand that, okay, people are gonna, we focus so long on the individual and trying to make them the best individual that we can. But if all our attention is there, then we're missing so many opportunities. So there's been a big shift in terms of looking at how our systems are driving and impacting performance.
I've got a maxim or a proverb for you, off the back of what you just said, actually. Ideas are worthless, implementation is everything.
Exactly, yeah.
And so people are getting this stuff conceptually, and I see this in my business as well. When I explain what I do and some of the models and methods, and people get it, but it's like, well, how do you actually get this stuff done? And that's the key bit where the gaps often appear. So on that basis, Ian, I mean, let's just shift into, as we sort of draw things to a close, what you do in your business and how you could help people, because I'm sure people will resonate with some of this stuff, and they hopefully recognize that there might be some gaps there. So how can you kind of step in and help people to actually plug some of those gaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main areas, so again, our sort of core business is education in human and organizational performance, and then integrating those concepts. And we've actually got a couple of key strategic partners, Equilibria and Fisher Improvement Technologies, as well as Safe Lanes over in Singapore, who are shipping consultants, and also Hillman Associates, HSE risk specialists there in the UK. And so, particularly for leaders, we do a lot of coaching around how do you have those conversations that really make the biggest difference in the workplace. And that's either in group settings, or we do a lot of one-on-one individual coaching. And that's some of the biggest areas of impact that we have. from a personal perspective, again, I've started doing a lot of work on an individual and inside of relationships. And that's with myself and my partner, Marley. So, yeah.
And where would people, where's the best place to kind of contact with you and learn more? And, have you got any other sort of resources like that PDF we mentioned?
Absolutely. So from an organizational perspective, the website safetycoach.com and got a bunch of resources on there, some webinars, got a free PDF called the 5 Critical Mistakes Most Safety Professionals Make. And a few other pieces on there. And you can see all the sort of different services that we offer. On a personal level, more the sort of personal relationships, unpcollins.com. And again, you can find the PDF there on 5 ways to cultivate more safety and trust inside relationships. It's a free download there. And you can get a lot more information about some of the courses that we're currently running, one in particular called Deeper in Love, and how to cultivate healthier and more intimate relationships.
Fantastic. A plethora of things to look at there, both from a business and a personal perspective. So I'll make sure to include all those links and stuff in the show notes. Ian, I really enjoyed that conversation. I think that there's so much to learn from that, and we could have probably spoken for hours about this, but it's kind of trying to keep it to a manageable length of the podcast is always the idea. But really recommend people reach out and connect with Ian and have a chat, because some of these topics are just so critically important in all aspects of life that anything we can do to improve them will be time and money well spent, I would say.
Absolutely. And appreciate the opportunity, Christian. It's really enjoyed this conversation, and please reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Instagram as well, Ian P. Collins. And as I start to grow that profile, as we just discussed before we jump on this call. Really enjoyed the conversation. And like you say, there's so much more we could really explore here in some very important areas of interest.
Great. Well, thanks, Ian, and thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks, Christian.